Ashley Carroll again back on stage, and she's going to talk from Capital as a Service, how can you democratize ventures through data. So thank you very much for being with us. Thank you very much for supporting us through workshops, this on-stage presentation, being with startups. So it's great that we could take full advantage of your time here. So thanks again for being with us during this intense time and supporting us throughout. Please give a big hand of applause to Ashley.
Thank you. Yes, it's been great to be here, so thank you all for being here and listening. So I'm going to talk about reducing bias through data-driven investing, and specifically, we have been doing this at Social Capital, both in the more traditional analog venture decision-making process through implementing processes, but we've actually begun experimenting with productization of it as well. Through a product called Capital as a Service, which we'll hopefully be opening up to the Eastern European region early next year. So first, just to sort of level set everyone, since I'm sure many of you have gone through a fundraising process, but some of you may have not. So let's talk about the status quo, and it's not very pretty for fundraising. So first, you get a warm intro to a venture capitalist. It better be pretty warm, or they're not likely to respond to you. You need to make a fancy pitch deck. There's varying degrees of methodology and science behind that. Usually there's a coffee chat or two involved with one of the partners or two on the team. You're typically asked for more and more and more data and information, not always with it being clear as to what sort of information answers they're looking for. Then there's the partner meeting, then there's term sheet negotiation, very manual. The end is often unknown in terms of timeline. It's not a very transparent process, and you'll likely experience significant delays. So anyone who has fundraised has probably unfortunately been through this, and oftentimes you hear nothing. And even if you do get an answer, it's usually just, oh, not a fit for us. There's no actionable feedback. So as a result, of this highly biased and human-driven process, there's a lot of bias in where the dollars are going. So 87% of VC-backed startup founders are white, and only 1% are black. Only 17% of VC-backed startups have a female founder, and of all of the VC dollars, or I should have been more currency agnostic, only 2 to 3% go to female entrepreneurs. And most concerning, there has not been significant progress in this over the last several years. So why? The short answer, because humans. So you're more likely to spend time with people that look and talk like you, and so in a process that is heavily dependent upon warm introductions and humans judging other humans, it's not actually surprising that there's a lot of bias in the system. So about a year ago, we at Social Capital decided to experiment with revamping the process. So what if we did away with the warm intro and we made any entrepreneur anywhere in the world able to come to us for capital? We would need to do away with pitch decks. They're highly unstructured, and we needed at least semi-structured data to make decisions at scale. We would do away with the scheduling and the rescheduling required to have synchronous communication. There would be a standardized data request, so entrepreneurs would know what to expect and why. There would be no partner meeting. You wouldn't have to fly to Palo Alto to see my partners and I. And any additional data requests would be very specific and targeted for the purpose of understanding anomalies in the standard data request. And because of this very standardized process, we would be able to get back to entrepreneurs quickly, communicate a very predictable timeline, and most importantly, be very transparent and provide actionable feedback. So we are investing for this reason, or we aren't investing for this reason. So as a result, we ran a pilot program about a year ago, and completely after the fact, we went back and looked at who we had algorithmically decided to fund, and most of the founders were actually non-white. This is not super surprising because we opened it up globally, so a lot of our entrepreneurs come from places like Latin America and Africa. But what is more surprising is that 42% of the founders that we backed were female, which is like well over 10x the industry standard. And also, great news for entrepreneurs, the decision time was under a week. And how do we do this? With software. So this is a screenshot of our Capital as a Service product. It's currently in private beta, as I mentioned. Hopefully, we'll be making it generally available region by region, and hopefully in Eastern Europe by early next year. And our goal is really to democratize access to entrepreneurship. So we think, first of all, it's just a good thing in the world in general to get more entrepreneurs to the starting line, to starting innovative businesses, and we also think it's really great for business. So how it works, there's an application form the entrepreneurs complete. It's fairly basic information about your business, essentially metadata. We then use that metadata to classify the business according to our proprietary ontology. So for example, this is a direct-to-consumer, freemium, subscription, business model, weekly use case product. We then make a standardized data request based on that classification, and we compare the business to relevant benchmarks to see where you stack up against similar types of businesses. An investment decision is made prior to any one-on-one contact, so we don't meet many of the entrepreneurs prior to funding them, and we also don't even have a synchronous conversation. And the feedback is completely transparent, precise, and actionable. So you might hear, we're sorry you didn't qualify for funding, your compound monthly growth rate looked good, but based on your customer acquisition costs, the lifetime value doesn't really support it, and that was mostly driven by poor retention, so we think you should go work on that. Relative to other businesses of your type, this is where you fall. So very clear and actionable feedback. So now I'll talk a little bit more about the data analysis that goes into our decision making. So this is a fairly basic, monthly recurring revenue business. We see charts like this all the time in pitch decks. Not super helpful. They're always up and to the right. We're not a big fan of the cumulative charts. So instead, we've broken it down, and we look at the movements within month to month. So within a given month to the next month, what portion of that is returning customers versus churn customers versus expansion or contraction revenue or resurrected customers. So we really understand at a much deeper level what is driving the revenue growth that we would typically just see on the left. Also, in terms of revenue metrics, we look a lot at lifetime value and also on a cohort basis. And then the other part of this equation is looking at the customer acquisition cost, which is a little more straightforward. So what we have here are LTV curves by cohort. So the shorter lines that don't extend as far are the more recent cohorts. So what we would hope to see over time, the shorter lines are outperforming the previous lines. So your latest customers are more valuable sooner, which is indicative of adding more value as you develop more of the product. Beyond just revenue, we also look at usage and engagement. So again, for a consumer business, monthly active users, we've seen many pitch decks with a graph like this. Not surprising that a cumulative graph would be up and to the right, hopefully. So again, we dig into the movements from month to month, and sometimes it is monthly, sometimes it's weekly, sometimes it's daily. It sort of depends on what the use case of the product is. And then we also look at lifetime value by engagement. So on the left, you can see this is a weekly use case product. You can see declining curves, which show retention over time. So again, the shorter lines are the newer cohorts, and you would hope to see the newer cohorts being retained at a higher level than the older cohorts as you improve the product. And then on the right, you can see cumulative weekly active user. We call it lifetime value because engagement is value. So similar idea, except this is more looking at cumulative usage over time. So for anyone who's interested in learning more, unfortunately we are still in private beta, but you can go to socialcapital.com/CAAS, which stands for Capital as a Service, and you can enter your email, identify as either an investor who is interested in co-investing with us or an entrepreneur who's interested in capital, either ideally at some point in the future. And we will add you to a mailing list and keep you apprised of the situation. And now I'm happy to open it up for questions for anyone in the audience.
Okay, I'll be like the stage microphone because we didn't know that there's questions.
Thank you.
So I'll miss my workout today. So if you tell me the question, then I'll shout it out loud.
All right. So on the premise that humans have bias, how does the algorithm not have a bias? Because it's based on historical data and it's built by humans.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's, I can repeat it. So it's a really great question. So, you know, with any sort of algorithm or training data, how do you avoid there being bias in the system? And this is a major reason why we are only looking at product traction to date. We are collecting a lot of information on the team. It would be fairly easy to add structured data on the size of the market. You know, venture decisions are usually made on the basis of team, market, and product. We're starting with product because we actually have been doing this quantitative analysis in an analog fashion for many years since the inception of the firm. And so we do know that this methodology works. So we've used the same methodology to identify some of the biggest winners in our portfolio and get to conviction sooner than our competitors. And then similarly, we've also used this methodology to avoid investing in some companies that maybe some metrics looked really great and others didn't.
Yeah. So what's the stage that you're investing in?
Pardon?
What's the stage that you're investing in?
Yeah, so...
In terms of ticket sizes and so on?
Yeah, so capital as a service is sort of a startup within social capital. So just like any entrepreneur in the audience, I need to go fundraise and convince our backers, our LPs, that this is going to deliver good returns. So we've started with a small amount of money, and because of that, we're currently investing up to $500,000 in a given round. And so it actually depends on sort of the region. We will invest in a company at any stage, assuming they have usually 6, sometimes 4 months of data, but at least 6 months of data post-launch. But once a company is raising $20 million, you know, they're not interested in a $500,000 check. So most of them tend to be like pre-seed, seeds, and Series A stage. Yeah, so a lot of people ask me, well, how's it working? How's it doing? So this is really a marketplace, and there's the entrepreneurs on one side of the marketplace, and then there's the investors on the other. I would say, you know, first and foremost, we had to find product market fit with the entrepreneurs, otherwise we would have nothing. As for product market fit with returns, you know, a year into this, our portfolio, you know, stacks up amongst the best seed portfolios. It's a little different looking. We have had a few liquidity events through acquisition, but, you know, high IRR, low cash-on-cash return. And the companies, because we're investing globally, tend to be much more capital efficient because there's not the same access to investment dollars.
Do you have any data on the success of the companies that you're investing in? I mean, you're doing it faster and more efficient. Does it work?
Yeah, so as for the speed of the decision, it used to be, I mentioned at the end of the pilot period, we were down to a week. Now, we've gone back and forth between promising SLAs and not. Most investment decisions are within 3 days, and that is because sometimes we do need to ask follow-up information, and particularly, like the decision whether to invest or not, the binary decision is relatively easy. The pricing and the deal dynamics are a lot harder, and so that is where there's less automation. So the 3 days is really just to account for the weekend, but many entrepreneurs get an answer within 24 hours.
Okay. Any other arms raised for questions? Oh, there, sorry.
Do you have a percentage for the amount of startups that were funded that were not from the US?
The percentage that are in the US?
That are not from the US.
Oh, so we've invested in about 70 companies in the last just over 9 months, and I think probably 85% are outside of the US. So our most popular regions, Latin America is very popular for us. Eastern Europe is. We've invested in a couple Turkish companies, a Bulgarian company, hopefully soon a Romanian company or two, and then Southeast Asia. And the reason for that does have a bit to do with the ticket size. So, you know, again, like if you're in, just the way it is, if you're in Silicon Valley and look like most of the VCs and have a decent sounding idea, you can just go up and down Sand Hill Road and come away with millions of dollars having not really done anything, whereas it doesn't work that way in the rest of the world. So yeah, most of them are from outside the US, and the US investments we have made are actually from the middle of the country because, believe it or not, if you're somewhere like the state of Michigan, where I'm from, it's probably no easier to fundraise there than it is from Romania.
Okay, one final question. Okay, if you raised your arm, there's one over there. Okay.
Hi. What sort of due diligence do you do? Do you trust the data from the companies?
Yes. So I'm frequently asked about, and this, to the earlier question about how our LPs feel about it. Early on, I was asked, like, but you're not doing any due diligence. I said, no, we're actually looking at every scrap of engagement and transaction data since the existence of the company, which I think is almost infinitely more diligence than just judging how much you like someone across, from them at coffee. So we are doing highly quantitative diligence. As for how we make sure the data is real and not modified, so in the beginning, it was mostly emailing CSVs, which is not very secure. We have moved to direct connectors, so the first one being with Stripe, where you can just enter your API key and we can get the data directly. And so it's, first of all, easier for the entrepreneur, so it is a better entrepreneur experience, and then the data is also verified. And so we'll be launching more and more of these connectors with analytics tools and payments tools. And then hopefully sometime in the not distant future, we'll actually have a social capital SDK that you can just implement, and then you won't have to do anything else.
So let me ask you one final question that I hinted at before. You've been both in the startup world and you've been in the VC world.
Yeah.
So for people that want to start a career, what would you recommend for the people when they're coming fresh out of university?
Yeah.
On which side of the areas to start with?
Yeah, well, I'm super biased because I took my path, but I would say I always encourage young grads to go get operating experience first. So you can get that by joining an established company or starting your own company. And then if you decide to become an investor at a later point in your career, you will have such a higher level of empathy because you will have been there, you know how hard it is. And also, I think your network for deal flow and hiring and everything else will be better as well because you were immersed in that operator ecosystem.
Thank you very much, Ashley. Highly appreciate it.
Thank you.
And please come back to Cluj and do a few investments here.
Of course.
I think that was an excellent question from the audience. So thank you very much.